A simple koan. Chapter 3. The years that followed found Saul in a precarious position. He had learned that he was a psychic vampire to his friends, an unwanted and constant apparition, drawing on their good times. His overall distaste at being part of the human race was evident in everything he did. High school was a time for him to express himself, and he did, with typical teenage angst. He was willing now to try anything. He had committed himself to the drug culture and all it detailed. Sam and his twin brother became constant companions. The drugs were coming between the halcyon days of summer. Saul discovered pot. He was chained to these two for one reason: to get stoned. Ninth grade had its shares of bullies and fools. Encompassing Saul's old friends were new acquaintances, whose sole purpose in Saul's life was to provide him with drug contacts. He hated these people, and had good reason to. With every drug transaction, with every taste of the sweet weed of childhood, Saul would be fed a continuous stem of abuse. These people, who had seemed to invade his life, were now robbing him of every piece of self-respect Saul had left. His best friend, Saul, had become one of them. He came to make a choice the summer after ninth grade. Saul chose not to call Sam again. Only living a block away, Saul chose to let Sam call him. As was expected, he never did. A friendship forged in good times, Saul would never forget, was over. Saul was again alone. High school was better than he could hope. When he left the outsider clique, the ones they called heads, Saul started to gain respect for himself. For the first time in his life, he had found a strength that he would rely on for the rest of his life. He had overcome an addiction, one that was causing him nothing but misery. He began to like himself, and as a result, he made new friends. These friends were kept at arm's length, it's true. The only one who was a good friend was Sam Marsh. Having known each other since sixth grade, Saul became Sam's only real friend. The only problem was that Saul was experiencing the normal teenage dilemma. He was still a virgin. Reaching 12th grade, Saul was tired of having to live with the embarrassment of never being with a woman. He knew how it looked, and he was not above the considerable pressure that it placed upon him. He was deathly afraid of being called gay, and how that would translate into a life of hell for him. It was really secondary to Saul that he actually get laid. He just wanted not to be classified as someone who was a loser or a fag. He turned again to the occult to rectify the situation. This time, Saul wanted to stop playing lip service to so-called magic. He decided that he was in for a penny, in for a pound. His next purchase would be something of more direct worship of the God that would grant him everything the flesh could desire. He bought the Satanic Bible. It was a terrifying step to take, and he knew that there may not be any going back. He became committed to the idea that Satan would become the instrumental force in his life. He would learn to give all of himself to the enemy. This would be the time in his life where he had fallen in love with the idea of distancing himself from his childhood God. The Satanic Bible, despite the overwhelming taboo of its title, is not just a book of blasphemy. It is actually a way for those who want to consciously give in to their own sociopathic tendencies, and the way to cover it up from the general public. He wasn't a sociopath, although he wished he was. Putting feelings away in order to accomplish what would be called success was not something he knew how to do. As he continued to read, he knew deeply that this wasn't for him. His own foolish attitude, his own pride had gotten in the way of who he truly was. He had found a way to grip the power that had been promised as a child. Regardless of his own misgivings, he was going to give this a try. He performed the greater magic of the book one night when his parents were away. He had only done this as a practice run. This time he didn't really ask for anything at all. He was only using the excuse of the satanic mass to make a break with God. A break that none of us, no matter how evil our intent, no matter how black the recesses of our heart, a break that none of us can truly make. Since there was no real desire past giving in to temptation, no real spell was performed that night. He would have to find something he truly wanted. It didn't take him long. She was one of the most beautiful girls in school. Now that he had a motive, a reason to perform the greater magic, he only had to look for his opportunity. Having done a trial run, he spent a great deal of time getting this spell ready. His parents out of town again, he made this spell count. Magic is performed in the early morning hours because the subject, the mark of the spell, would be asleep. He took his time. This one was going to work. About 4 a.m. he started. The ritual came first, then a sort of time-out period would occur. Let's get this straight. LaVey, the author of the Bible, knew what he was doing. Satanists make the claim that their religion has been around for a lot longer than the Judeo-Christian faith, and they may be right. These rituals have been passed down for countless generations. All he knew was that he touched that power that night. He knew as he finished and walked out to the front porch with his chalice in his hand. He looked into the eastern horizon. There, sitting just on top of the mountains, was his muse. It was the morning star, Lucifer. He saluted it. The spell was a success. The girl he asked for, someone who had just started to warm up to him, suddenly became very pliable. She consented to go to a party with him that took place after a play he was in. The play was a huge success, and he was walking on air by the time they went out. Now, Saul was considered by his peers to be just another geek. He was skinny and tall, not exactly what the popular girls were looking for. She was rather cold to him when they were at the party, making it appear as though she wasn't interested. This party was on the hills around town, hills the locals called mountains. There was an urban myth about these mountains, that the Satanists practiced their religion there. He had heard the myth, but like so many people took it to just be talk. It wasn't until he got in the car after the party that the real action took place. She suddenly became very friendly. In the back of the car, the virgin Saul was about to seal the deal in more ways than one. It was made quite clear in the Satanic Bible that if you ask for something and get it, you must take it with relish. He, in the heat of this moment, was forgetting that what he took, when he took it, what he asked for, that the deal was done. Take it, and the contract between you and Satan is signed. You are his. Take this girl and forget your destiny. Take this girl and forever be Satan's son. As things moved towards climax, Saul was not thinking of what he had done, the spell. It was at this point that the girl said something. Words came out of her mouth that was transmitted from the very throne of God. While they kissed deeply, exploring each other, she said something that would draw Saul back into the reality of the situation. Breathlessly, without a bit of irony, she said, "Saul, protect me from the Satanists." This drew Saul back. Saul wanting so much to be, but not being, a monster, didn't ignore her statement. Suddenly he came back to himself, back to that little boy who once asked God to prove himself. The day the door to his room had opened up. As they say, when God closes a door, he opens a window. God was saying, "Saul, you have been given an opportunity to stop this." "Saul," God had said through her, "you are my child, not his." He stopped. He got in the driver's seat and drove away. Needless to say, the girl didn't understand. Saul had come to himself again. Again, despite his desires, he did the right thing. She later moved on to one of Saul's friends. The spell had completely backfired. Although Saul tried and tried to reattach his connection to Satan, it didn't seem to work. He performed the greater magic again and received what he wanted. Saul just didn't have it in him to take his desires and turn his back on the living God. As high school ended, he grew tired of being this pawn in a chess game between these two powers of the universe. It would take Saul lashing out in anger that truly, irreparably, broke that connection with the evil one that Saul had always known. Lashing out in anger would cause Saul to spend several days in the hospital, almost dying from his wounds. For those days, Saul would experience a hell of his own making. Those days in the hospital would steer young Saul's life in a brand new direction. The break from the powers that be would finally be his.